In this video, we're going to talk about the top tips to advertise your podcast in 2026. So if you've been podcasting for any length of time, you know that there's kind of different buckets of needs that you have. There's actually producing the podcast itself. There's figuring out how can I earn revenue or monetize this content. And then also, the biggest bucket probably, how do I grow my audience? How do I find more people to consume my content, watch my videos, listen to my podcast episodes, and share it with their friends so that they then start listening to the podcast? So in this video, I'm going to walk through some top strategies that are evergreen, that will always work, especially in 2026, so you can get more listeners by advertising your podcast. So the first thing that you definitely don't want to forget is to make sure that your podcast is widely available, that you take advantage of every single podcast directory that exists. That includes the main ones like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube now, if you have a video component to your podcast. Even if you don't, a lot of podcast hosting platforms offer RSS audio uploads to YouTube, so you can still get listed there if you want to share a YouTube link to grow your audience. But then the smaller ones like Podbean, Overcast, Podcast Addict, Castbox, GeoSavan, all the podcast directories, everywhere that someone could potentially listen to your podcast, you want to make sure that you're listed there. Why? Well, because when you go to share your podcast and you tell somebody, hey, you should go listen to my most recent episodes, if they're already consuming podcasts on their favorite app, you want your show to be there. You don't want to have to convince them to switch apps just to listen to your podcast when they already listen to all the other podcasts on their own preferred app. So make sure that you can go through, directly submit your show to the ones that require direct submission like iHeart and Amazon Music. A lot of other ones will pull directly from Apple Podcasts, so you want to make sure that your show is available there. And then just make sure that anytime you discover a new podcast app or hear of a new one, double check to make sure you're listed there. This way, no matter where somebody searches for you, they can find your show. The second piece or key ingredient that you need to have a successful growth strategy in 2026 is to create a compelling podcast trailer. While this may seem like a little bit of extra work that doesn't really give you a lot of benefit, it really does. Number one, if you're just starting out, it gives you something that you can submit to podcast directories to get listed in their directories as a new show before you're ready to launch with episode 1. So that's a really helpful thing. The other great thing about a podcast trailer, though, is that it's a lot more bite-sized than your typical long-form podcast episode. And so if you have podcast interviews ranging from 30 to 45 minutes, that could be a tall task to invite somebody to check out a full episode of your podcast, where a 2-minute or a 3-minute podcast trailer is a lot easier for somebody to say, okay, I'll taste this, I'll try this and see if I'm interested in a long-form podcast episode. It doesn't take too much of your time to create a small trailer with who it's for, why it's awesome, and what they can expect to get out of the podcast, and then post that on all the podcast directories. This is also a great piece of content if you want to spruce it up with some extra video editing and do some B-roll shots and clips from different episodes to really create like a sizzle reel or something exciting, something tangible that somebody can really get a sense of what your show is going to be about, kind of like a movie trailer that you watch before you go and watch a movie in the theaters. Another really cool way that you can use a podcast trailer is through advertising platforms like audiencelift.com, where you can upload your trailer, pick some targeting, and then advertise your podcast trailer directly on digital publishing platforms to align with your ideal listening audience and reach new listeners. That's a really fantastic way to use a podcast trailer, not just in your RSS feed, but also to grow your audience and reach new people. The third strategy for growing your podcast audience and advertising your podcast is to run targeted ad promotion campaigns, like on the audiencelift.com platform I just mentioned, where you can upload your trailer, upload your podcast artwork, short description, pick your targeting, and you're off to the races. There are other places you can advertise as well. Spotify offers audio ads. YouTube offers ads as well, though definitely make sure that you're familiar with Google Ads if you want to do it yourself. If not, you can use a platform like audiencelift.com to grow your YouTube channel as well. Overcast ads, Castbox, Podcast Addict, most of the third-party apps and some of the major ones will offer their own advertising platform, meaning you can log in, you can run a campaign directly to existing podcast listeners on that app, and then track your progress as you go. The next thing that you want to pay attention to is your website. If you have a website for your podcast, or if your podcast is a page on an existing website, make sure that it's optimized for discoverability. Utilize best practices from search engine optimization and now AI optimization as well for showing up in places like ChatGPT and Gemini results. Make sure that you are providing keyword-rich titles, descriptions or blog content, transcripts if you have those accordion style content folders that you can use on your content management system. Basically, just make sure that when you're creating this podcast content, you're putting it on your website as well, if you haven't created a special website just for your podcast. And what that allows you to do is potentially show up as a result if somebody is searching for technology podcasts or healthcare podcasts, things like that. And Google identifies your podcast as a really good candidate to be an answer in that search result. You can potentially show up there and reach new people. Kind of next to this or adjacent to this strategy is finding those lists of podcasts that typically people look to recommend. So if you type best business podcasts, you will see articles with 25, 30, 40 podcasts listed out for somebody to peruse through and pick their favorites to go and check out. A lot of these lists you can email or reach out to the website specifically, ask about the placement criteria. Some of them will offer it to you for a fee. And then you just have to decide, is it worth advertising my podcast on this list, potentially reach people this way? And then the final strategy that we're going to cover in this video for how to advertise your podcast in 2026 is to cross-promote with other podcasters. And this could take a couple of different forms. The first one would just be to be a guest on their podcast, to show up as a guest contributor, offer your own analysis and expertise, and then as a part of the conversation, plug your own podcast as well. And this works really great as a swap because you can have them on your podcast if you do interviews and vice versa and share each other's audience. The other thing you can do is use your podcast trailer that you made a couple tips ago and run it as an advertisement inside of other podcasts. You can reach out to the podcaster directly if they're a part of a network. You can reach out to the network administrator, whoever handles ad sales for that podcaster, and say, hey, I'd love to sponsor an episode of this podcast. Here's my creative to reach that specific listening audience. And then also doing feed swaps would be the third way that you could do this, where you take an episode of your podcast, upload it to somebody else's feed as a bonus episode, and then in exchange, upload an episode of their show to your feed as a bonus episode. So your listeners can hear something that's similar to what you typically cover, but from a different voice, different perspective, and give each other some exposure to new listeners. Now, if you want to learn even more about how to advertise your podcast in 2026 and the strategies that we really recommend, you can go to audiencelift.com/blog to find this specific blog post. I'll leave that link in the description below as well, so you can see even more tips, learn even more details about the strategies we did cover, and take those next steps to get more listeners in 2026.